Hello, and today we are going to be talking about the Japanese samurai and the Japanese samurai's culture. Um, uh, yeah, and that's what we're going to do. I'm Mrs. Vitalspot, and let's begin. So, to understand the Japanese samurai, we need to understand feudalism in ancient Japan. And feudalism is a form of an economic system where we see an upper class and a lower class, and there's a formation of this. And we often see it, I'll show you in a minute, a pyramid of what feudalism, what that pyramid looks like. But this is where we see like a higher class on the top, held by fewer people, and then a large group of people on the bottom that don't have any power. And in feudalism in Japan, the emperor is at the top, followed by the shogun, which are the supreme governors, supreme generals, the landowners, daimyos, and warriors called the samurai, and then last we see the peasants and merchants at the bottom. Japanese borrow much of their culture from China and Korea, and you want to think about that when you're thinking about like a map of China, or of Japan. It's an island. It's an archipelago, actually, a group of islands that are very close to both China and Korea, so they get a lot of their ideas there. Most of Japan was originally Shintos, but that does change a bit as far as it does start to go towards Buddhism, and Buddhism, of course, comes from India originally, and then really finds a stronghold in China, and then moves from China into Japan. So here is our feudalist view. So we have the emperor at the top all the way down to the merchants. And so when we think about this group down here, these are the people who make up most of the population, along with I should kind of change this here, along really from the peasants down to the merchants, make up most of Japanese people. But then we see the smallest group with the most power would be the emperor at the top. All right. The roles of the samurai, well, they come from a warrior class. They follow a strict behavioral code known as Bushinto, or the way of the warrior. And they act as royal bodyguards for the daimyos and the shogun and the lords. And if we go back to our, I can't go back to our, there we go, our chart here, you can kind of see what we're looking at. So this is where we're seeing the samurai come in, is right in here, okay? So what are the lives are the samurai like? They're supposed to be, full of courage, discipline, reverence towards gods, have fairness, and generosity to those weak. And they are really known for their samurai sword, as seen here, or the katana, which is the long sword, and the washasite. I apologize in advance for my really bad pronunciation of all things Japanese. Katana I have right, if that is important. And here are some examples of some of the long and short swords. One of the other things that we need to understand is the top knot. This is a sign of respect. And you see this today even in like sumo wrestling and things like that. So this is this little doodah right there. So the death of a samurai, what does that have to do with? You want to die of an honorable death. and that's more important than having like a long life, so you need to die with honor. If you are dishonored, you need to commit suicide. Okay. So one of the key things that we're going to look at here is what led to the decline of the samurais. The samurais had ruled, the tokunachas had ruled from the early 16th to 18th century, and this was the dynasty of the shoguns, which had originally unified Japan in the 1600s. But after the fall, the new emperor came in and wanted to modernize Japan to compete with the Western world. So they wanted to be more like Europe, America, and this led to a lot of change in the way that they had been ruled. And even here we see that the military was reformed to become more like the English, which you will also see this in the movie The Last Samurai. So another things here, the idolized samurai class was seen as like not necessary with this new modern Japan. They became unemployed, and the government tried to abolish the entire samurai class, so the entire group of people. This is what these guys had known. This whole class of society had known being samurai, so they couldn't just go out and be whatever else they needed to be. And in fact, samurais were banned from carrying swords in public, and they had all their statues and status removed. Ultimately, the samurai way of life was pushed out and slowly started to fade away. They were not considered important anymore. And you're going to see this whole action in the movie The Last Samurai, which shows actually a American coming in and kind of learning the samurai traditions, and then, well, I don't want to give the whole thing away, so I'm not going to continue more about it. So we also want to talk about after I'm kind of jumping a little bit here into Japanese imperialism. So this is after the samurais have been kind of wiped out. This is after British had kind of come in and showed them kind of the way that things could be, and they started to become imperialistic. And imperialism, we're talking about a policy. Imperialism is growing your nation to become stronger and kind of take over. Let me show you guys actually where we are, and show you and become kind of controlling of the other areas. And so after the Meiji Restoration, Japan was looking to strengthen itself, and it started to compete with the West and kind of grow into the areas and territories around it. They started to have like a real strong national pride, and they started to have these goals for security, and they wanted to make more things. They were becoming very much like kind of a miniature Europe. And here we see, this is where Japan is, the archipelago of Japan. It's made up of like 100 islands, believe it or not, even though you don't see each one of those. And then we start to see where they're trying to come into Manchuria and Korea, Mongolia, China, and even over here into, what is today Vietnam, Thailand. So this whole kind of section of the Pacific Ocean is an area that the Chinese are going to kind of come into. And this is what we're seeing in the world. So if you're envisioning the United States is over here, I kind of got Hawaii would be about over here. So this is where we are in the world. So what are they doing and why are they doing this? They want to go to Korea to get the raw materials, the farmland and security. They want to go to China to get raw materials, a market and farmland. They want to go to Hokkaido for farmland, lumber, and other resources, and Okinawa for resources and security. This is fueled by racism, social Darwinism, the idea that the survival of the fittest will be the ones that get the furthest. And of course, the Japanese felt they were the best. Got news for you. If you're in the United States, you think we're the best. If you think you're in England, you think you're the best. So it's kind of the belly of the beast. So during World War II, the Chinese started to expand into China, which caused conflict, obviously, with the Chinese and as well as the Russian Empire, which was trying to expand, which led to the Shinto-Japanese War, which is China versus Japan in the 1800s. This led to the end of Chinese influence in Korea. It led to the Japanese modernization and industrialization. And Japan became the dominated power in Asia. They become the strongest country in Asia. The Russo-Japanese War ultimately ends in 1904 with the Japanese winning. And we have the peace with Teddy Roosevelt from the United States negotiating the peace. And he actually won a Nobel Peace Prize for that. Yay, Teddy. I'm a big fan of Teddy Roosevelt. Yay, love you, Teddy. Russia had Russia had abandoned its goal to expand into the East, and it allowed Japan to be the supreme power in East Asia. Between 1928 and 1932, the Japanese faced a domestic problem, which means inside of Japan itself, and that domestic problem was an economic collapse. They had their own Great Depression. It led to prices going crazy and unemployment being really bad, and they weren't being able to export things, and there was all of that leads to social unrest, so people are really unhappy. And then in 1931, they move into Manchuria, which is in northern China, and they're not nice when they move to Manchuria. They're very, very violent. We'll look at that in a second. But they also spread the idea of greater East Asian prosperity in the sphere emerged, which is this here is what we're seeing. All of this red is referring to what what Japan actually controls at the time. This is huge considering the country of Japan is here. So they're doing very, very, very well, becoming very strong. In case you didn't notice those dates, again, we're looking at 1932. Those dates sound familiar. There is a country in Europe that's doing something very similar to this under the man named Adolf Hitler. So this is at the same time that Europe is facing a problem with Germany. And this is why those two groups are actually going to ally up with each other. So one of the other things that happen is something referred to as the Rape of Nanking. And this is while the Japanese are occupying China. The Japanese troops go in, they rape, murder, and torture Chinese civilians. This is sometimes referred to as the Second Shinto-Japanese War. This is also photographed quite extensively and bears similarities to Holocaust-type situations. This is, you see people being beheaded, and you see people being shot and thrown into mass graves. So very, very similar to some of Hitler's kind of stupid acts that he does. Let me kind of move on here. So we're looking at 300,000 Chinese murdered over 6 weeks. Those are giant numbers. Yeah, not good stuff. There were killing contests between officers to see who could kill the first Japanese with only a sword, first 100 Japanese with only a sword. And this is like really like sick, torturous stuff. Here's some beheadings, gross, more heads off. And all of this starts to lead, like I said, World War I is World War II is going on, and the Japanese decide, they're kind of in there with their ally, Germany, and to hell with all this, we're going to, go all in, and we're going to attack Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii, which at the time was a U.S. territory, and so they attack Pearl Harbor. And the famous phrase is, "We believe we've awoken the sleeping giant," because the United States isn't going to just let this go. So now they're going to have to attack, kind of get involved in the the United States is going to, spoiler alert, an American's going to fight back pretty bad over the idea of Pearl Harbor. So why is Japan in this? They're still in need of raw materials and to expand their plans to get larger. They saw the United States as a threat and attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941 to prevent the U.S. Navy from stopping them. We get 2,403 Americans killed, 1,178 wounded. They also attack the Philippines, Guam, Malaysia, Singapore, and the U.S. declares war on Japan the next day. That's the famous, today is a day that will live in infamy speech by Roosevelt. So in order to win World War II, the Americans or the Japanese were hopping all around the Pacific. So the United States went to each one of each of those islands and fought each island back. Some of which we the United States kind of kept for our own territory, and some we gave back to the people. Some key victories for the United States were Midway, Guadalcanal, and Hiroshima. And it allowed the Americans to get closer to Japan, although the biggest thing was the dropping of 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which resulted to the Japanese surrendering in 1945. And World War II was over, and the U.S. actually then occupied I messed up this whole time. So let me go back here for a second. Here's our island hopping. So this is where we were going from one island to another. Oops. I don't know how I messed that up. I don't need to do all of them. Here is still not working right. I apologize. So let me just move on this way. Here are the 2 bombs that were dropped. Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th, 1945, and 100,000 were killed. And then you have on August 9th, 1975, Fat Man dropped on Nagasaki. I actually saw, kind of side note here, Fat Boys dropped from a plane called the Enola Gay, which is on display at the Smithsonian, and I saw it last year, and I, until that time, had never even thought about that plane, and assumed, quite honestly, that that plane didn't make it, but it did. The people who dropped the atomic bomb survived, and that plane is on display in Washington, D.C. You can go down and see it if you're interested. And this is the location of those two spots. So this is where the first bomb is dropped. This is where the second bomb is dropped. Ba-boom, there they are. That's the famous mushroom cloud. This is what it looks like afterwards, just completely devastated. This is the signing of the peace agreement. And one of the things that does happen at this time too is that every single samurai sword in Japan is collected. Because during World War II, there was kind of a rebirth of the samurai culture, and everyone carried a samurai, every Japanese soldier carried a samurai sword. And afterwards, they said, okay, we're going to collect all of these. And it's kind of a crazy backstory. With these samurai swords, a lot of them were mass-produced, but some of them had been, in families for centuries. And they were all given back to the Americans. Some were kept, some were destroyed. Point being here is that the Americans didn't know nor care what swords were there, and they lost a lot of really important swords that were destroyed by the Americans' sheer ignorance on age. So we talk about like famous relics. That's kind of a sad moment in history. So what's happened to Japan since World War II? Well, they've had an economic boom. I mean, they are one of the fastest growing economies in the world. The U.S. occupied them for a long time, which means that we are in Japan for almost 20, 30 years and oversee everything they do. They have two main goals. They want to eliminate their potential to have a war, and they also want to turn into Japan into a Western-style nation like America. And I totally lied about those years, like 10, that lasted from 1945 to 1952. And it was turned into a democracy like we have today. There they are. So this is MacArthur. And then this is Hirohito, the last emperor of Japan. The United States sends billions of dollars in aid to Japan. Millions had been starving. MacArthur sets up food distribution. And the United States had 350,000 U.S. personnel in Japan. So what happens? They renounce the war and don't have any army. They have their own constitution, spurred on by the United States Bill of Rights and the New Deal. And they work to protect worker unions and working conditions improve, as well as education being reorganized. Let me go back up. Just want to take a quick. I think this is the best way to do it. Sorry. They become the second largest economy. They provide the U.S. aid the United States provides aid because they believe that if the people were unhappy, they would switch to communism, which the United States was in great fear of after World War II. This is the time of the Cold War, so they wanted to keep them as happy as they possibly could. And many companies promised lifetime employment for its people, so they could kind of get there and kind of stay there forever and be kind of satisfied. So this is where we're seeing the economic boom. United States and Japan growing very, very quickly. Things that are made in China or in Japan, cars. These are companies that are still around today, most of them. Okay, becomes one of the world's largest economies. Look at them right there below the United States and China. This is what Tokyo looks like today. They have an extremely high defense budget. Again, just behind the United States, China, Russia, and the United Kingdom. And that's it. That was quick. All right, I wanted to make that kind of quick and painless. So I hope that helped a little bit. Yeah, there we go. All right.